Welcome back to the Wheel of Time Diaries. I'm your host, King Crusoe. You can call me KC, and today is episode 1 with regard to Towers of Midnight, the penultimate book of the series, written primarily by Brandon Sanderson. This week there's a little bit less to talk about than I was initially anticipating and expecting on account of time-related reasons. I've spent a lot of time the last couple of weeks getting ahead on content, primarily just getting basically everything for March done that I could. And it ended up working out pretty well, all things considered. But it meant that my reading time the last few days has been a little bit less than I expected. And so I didn't get quite as far into the book as I expected. I had relatively little time. I also had a bit of a reading slump a couple weeks ago that caused some other books to be delayed in my schedule, which meant starting this it didn't happen as early as I had anticipated either. So basically, I'm not covering quite as much of the book today as I had thought. I thought I'd be covering the prologue and chapters 1 through 15. Instead, I'm covering chapters 1 through 10. I only reached chapter 11 this week, so hopefully that means we'll have a diary that's under an hour long for the first time in a little while. Because, there was a little bit less reading that I got done for all intents and purposes. I read for a little under 6.5 hours this week, getting the prologue and the first 10 chapters read. And for spoiler-free first impressions, I gotta say, I've been into this book so far. I don't really have any complaints about it. In fact, I'm pretty excited about the fact that there are a couple storylines that immediately have some relevant and interesting plot momentum, not just build-up stuff, but like straight up actually getting pretty much straight to the point. There's also a couple of relative side characters that are being utilized up to this point in interesting ways that have basically taken a backseat or more or less haven't existed for a little while in the series that I'm glad to see actually have a role, and looking forward to seeing more from them. And there's also a couple of developments that completely shift the way that the Gathering Storm went as well, which makes part of the world political scenario a little bit more complicated, we shall say. The other thing worth noting as we begin Towers of Midnight as well is that POV allocation is a little bit more interesting this time around. There are a couple storylines that are immediately starting a little bit more tied together. And with the way some of those scenes are actually organized, it means that talking about this book, at least so far as this week's diary is concerned, is going to be slightly more complicated than even the Gathering Storm was, where I tried to organize the Gathering Storm by POV sections or storylines or something like that most of those weeks. At least for this week, we're going to do something a little bit different and just do straight up the storylines, regardless of where the material from those storylines actually take place. So we're not going to cover all of the prologue and then move on to chapters whatever. We're going to cover storylines as they happen in turn, as it becomes relevant. So that is what we've got going on there. But the actual material itself, very, very good. Most of my general thoughts about any of them at this point that I could say in the spoiler-free section, I think are a little bit more relevantly stated in the spoiler section, actually. I don't have much of a first impression spoiler-free thing here to say, unfortunately. I'm sorry about that, but really there's just not much to talk about other than the actual content of the story and then my reactions to all of it in turn, because a lot of it is the spoilers of what actually happens, so we might as well just move on with that. But of course, we are still going to start with the prologue technically, because the first storyline that I want to talk about, or rather the first section of the world that I want to talk about for today, is the events that occur in the Borderlands. There are 3 scenes in the prologue that occur in the Borderlands, plus one other in chapter, let's see what it is, 8. The first scene of chapter 8 also occurs there, so we do have a few Borderlands-related scenes. Of course, if you recall, in Knife of Dreams, and then it is also mentioned a bit in Gathering Storm, Nynaeve had sent Lan up to the Borderlands to go fulfill what he perceives as his destiny as Malkieri, to basically guard the Borderlands against the Blight, Malkier specifically. And Nynaeve made Lan promise way back when she dropped him off there that he would accept anybody who rode along the path with him to do this deed, basically, so that he wouldn't die alone, because that's what Nynaeve doesn't want to happen, is for him to just die alone, because otherwise that's what Lan was basically going to allow to happen to himself. So the very first scene of the prologue is Lan traveling along the Borderlands and doing so alone before he comes across an old acquaintance pulling supplies along the road, somebody he recognizes and initially tries to refuse help for. You know, he tries to do the whole Aes Sedai technicality thing and be like, well, I promised Nynaeve that I would let anybody who wants to ride with me, and this person isn't riding a horse or anything like that. But ultimately, Lan does allow this person to join him, and the reason that this is going on is because, well, when Nynaeve dropped Lan off in the Borderlands, Malkier is, of course, all the way over to the east, and he was dropped off basically at the very tip of the world all the way to the west along the Blight. So Lan has to travel a very long distance to get to Malkier, and also that means that, well, we also had some scenes of Nynaeve going and talking to people specifically who are of Malkieri descent, so that they would go find Lan, essentially, and join him. And this happens in this scene, and there is a scene in Chapter 8, like I mentioned earlier, the very first scene where Lan, alongside this first acquaintance that he picks up, meets a few more old acquaintances along the journey, and though he tries to also keep them away from him, not wanting anybody else to necessarily be involved in this this drive of his to, you know, die alone at Malkier, to guard Malkier. He does eventually relent, and, or actually in this scene he doesn't necessarily relent, it's just that these three join his group anyway. So now there are 5 Malkier riding along to defend the Blight, basically. That's what's going on there. There's another scene in the prologue from Padan Fain's POV where he's doing some of his own little dastardly deeds in the Blight, including attacking and seemingly gaining some control over some of the dark forces up there, like over some of the Trollocs, and taking out a Myrddraal for whatever his purposes are. It seems like his intent at this point is just to be the little evildoer that he is, probably the most compelling villain despite being very underutilized throughout the series. He basically aims to personally kill Rand, and then it seems like he also wants to get back at the Dark One, maybe for own personal gain, but it's really just a matter of he seems to be so touched and tainted by being a dark friend. He's such a dark friend that he's just like straight up the core essence of evil at this point as a person, which is kind of interesting. That seems to be that's my interpretation of him as a character anyway. And yeah, so he's doing stuff up in the Blight, whatever all of that actually is, and how that comes into fruition through the rest of this book and the next book is yet to be determined. But you know, Padan Fain being Padan Fain, of course. And then there is a final scene up in the Borderlands from the prologue that involves some communication between some towers in Kandor, specifically that nation having been broken down, where there was like a distress signal or something like that called by one tower that another tower tries to respond to but doesn't get any further responses about, and there's some other breakdowns of communication. So there is a commander of this particular tower named Commander Rai. He has messages sent back to this tower, for example, and to some other towers to further to the south, because they are borderland countries, of course. They're still defending against the Blight, preparing for an onslaught of Trollocs and the like to occur, and it does very shortly thereafter actually occur. Commander Rai, notably in the scene, makes his son a warrior 3 days early compared to his normal rise to manhood, basically. The rite of passage, I guess you could call it. And so they plan to fight off the forces here along the border as long as it takes for the South to prepare, as long as it takes for messages to get to the mainlands, so that they can be informed that the Blight is now being overrun by Trollocs. That is something that is happening now. So, the beginnings of all of this madness, essentially. So, yeah, that is basically all that's happening in the Borderlands as far as we get to see some particular scenes that occur there. Not entirely sure how important some of the details are with regard to like that final scene are, but it was a really great scene nonetheless. I certainly enjoyed it a good bit. But that is going to take us on to the next storyline, and that is going to be the White Tower storyline. And tangentially related is also going to be Rand's storyline, because, well, Rand is in the White Tower area at the moment, of course. At the end of the Gathering Storm, we got to see some really cool scenes of Rand kind of realizing what it is about accepting your destiny and working with regard to that, accepting the way that you approach that. Even if you didn't necessarily like the circumstances inherently, you can choose how you react to it. And so Rand reacted by a very keen sense of acceptance at the end of the Gathering Storm. He finally made that final push, and that was honestly, it was a very cathartic moment for the book to basically end on that note. But of course, Rand made that final acceptance on the slopes of Dragonmount, or rather at the very top of Dragonmount, which is right next to Tarvalon. And chapter 1 begins from not Rand's POV, but does have another character who originally way back in Eye of the World was somebody who transported Rand and Matt on part of their journey to Caemlyn all the way back in the day. Of course, that was only a couple years ago within the story, but that was 3 years ago when I read that book almost. And so Amon Bunt, if that's his name, Bunt, however you want to pronounce it, I don't really care. The point is, there's this character who is at Dragonmount. He is observing an apple orchard nearby that is basically in a very keen state of disaster, where there's basically nothing usable from the apple crop for the year. He genuinely wonders the possibility of survival with so many food woes in the world, not just his apple orchard, but just kind of in general. The world just is in a state of disrepair with regard to food. Everything spoils, and it's really bad. But he is at this orchard observing this, and he also wonders a little bit about potentially returning to Caemlyn after, hearing news about some shakeups within the leadership there, but is distracted by Rand emerging from the path that goes up to Dragonmount. He's a little confused by this, but there's Rand coming down from Dragonmount. There's also the sun poking through the clouds, which, as we established at the end of the Gathering Storm, is kind of an irregular occurrence as of recent for the sun to have popped through. That was something that the sisters noticed in the White Tower following the Shan attack. It was all of this stuff going on. So the sun's poking through now. Rand comes down from the mountain, and all of a sudden, basically in Rand's presence, all of the apple trees suddenly dissolve all of their worthless crop yield for the season and immediately begin to replace it, which of course, for multiple reasons, is impossible. But that this does happen, it does occur, and Rand also advises for the apples to be picked before the Dark One can essentially ruin them again, and he departs, notably with a smile, heading towards the city. Very interesting scene, and honestly a very solid start. That scene, I think, felt a little bit more like a prologue scene than a chapter 1 scene, in my opinion, but in either case, it was a great opening that follows up on the end of the Gathering Storm in really impactful ways, and shows the stark difference between the scary version of Rand that was the Gathering Storm, because holy cow, that was a scary version of the character, whereas now in Towers of Midnight he's a much more serene character, and we get to see this a little bit more actively in the actual White Tower storyline that occurs as well, because in chapter 3 we go back to basically a combination of Egwene's and Swan's POVs, but Egwene sends word to Nynaeve in the beginning of the chapter in a dream, telling her to meet with her in 2 days' time, so that they can discuss some important matters. There's a couple of factors relating to Nynaeve and Elaine, for example, both needing to be raised properly to the shawl now that the tower is united and now that Egwene is Amyrlin. So this is something that needs to occur as a meeting with Nynaeve for that reason. And then there's also retroactively another reason to meet with Nynaeve when Egwene wakes up at the beginning of the chapter, or rather after having, sent this message to Nynaeve's dreams, saying it is determined that the Dragon Reborn seeks a meeting with Egwene personally, and so that meeting does occur. You have a little bit of Swan POV where she personally reflects on Egwene's strengths and her power, her ability, surpassing even her own with regard to just being the Amyrlin seat, being an effective leader in ways that Swan realizes when reflecting upon herself that she would never be, that it is all in all a good thing that she had been deposed and that the problems with Elaida occurred so that the unification under Egwene could happen, because Egwene is already looking to be like one of the strongest, if not the strongest Amyrlin in a very, very long time. So that's all very cool to see some of that from her perspective, and we get to see a little bit of this perspective as Rand is taken in to meet with Egwene in the hall, and I believe Swan notices a little bit of Tavern energy kind of surrounding Rand, as he seems to be like purposely trying to use this energy to manipulate situations in his favor to some degree. But doing so in a less actively evil way than he was in The Gathering Storm, I suppose, because he's genuinely a little bit more content and happy and like a normal person with emotions again. In the beginning of this book, you get the meeting between Rand and Egwene with the Hall of the Tower there as well, where Rand requests some aid in sealing the bore, where the Aes Sedai did not actually aid during Lews Theron's time. The reason why all of these problems are happening, the breaking of the world, the Dark One not being properly imprisoned the entire way, or anything being like really solidified with regard to defeating the Dark One during the previous age, during the Age of Legends, was because the female channelers, the female Aes Sedai, just refused to help Lews Theron and the male Aes Sedai do it. And Rand recognizes that this is a problem and he needs the women, so he wants to petition Egwene personally. He's just like, hey, Egwene, you guys should let me seal the bore properly to do this. But in so requesting this, he also mentions that he needs to break the seals of the Dark One's prison in order to do so, that he plans to do that. And this is obviously not the most comforting plan, because breaking the seals of the prison means that the Dark One has the ability to just straight up be set free. But Rand is insistent that I need to be able to break the seals of the prison to reseal him properly. So yeah, there's a little bit of discussion, a little bit of back and forth between Egwene and Rand here. It's a very interesting dynamic that they have with each other in this scene. I thought it was fascinating. I thought it was very enjoyable to read as well. And also interesting to note that none of the other women actually make any verbal interjection during the scene as well. And you wonder why until at the very end. It seems like the case that none of the women were able to speak. They're all confused, or maybe not confused, they're impressed that Egwene personally was able to speak with Rand at all, because none of the others were able to actually make any input. It's like the Tavern energy was forbidding any of the others from interjecting and putting forth their own protestations. But anyway, Rand wants to meet again with Egwene regarding some of the terms for how this is going to work the day before that he goes off to Shale Ghul. He wants to discuss plans about how to do these things, and he came to give the women warning that this is what he's doing so that they could make plans and so that they could talk about it later, which is nice of him, I guess. But when he leaves, like I said, the hall reveals that the Tavern Touch must not have allowed them to be able to speak about any of what was going on, and that's really interesting stuff to me. So I'm looking forward to seeing a little bit more of that. There's not a whole lot more of White Tower plotline to talk about for the week. I believe it is just chapter 5 that is relevant here, which I believe chapter 5 is basically just a Gawain POV, where Gawain, we get a little bit more information of stuff that is going on in the tower since the reunification of it. And of course, we remember from the Gathering Storm that Messiana is still in the White Tower, and she seems to be committing some assassinations, some murders of sisters in the tower every once in a while. And Gawain personally is inspecting the sites of murder of the fourth sister since the unity of the tower to be murdered in this way, and he suspects that Egwene's story, the official story of the White Tower here, being that it is Black Aja sisters using gateways to reemerge into the tower to commit an assassination and leave. Gawain suspects that this official story is false and that it is probably more likely a gray man or some other form of assassin being the culprit on account of multiple different things. And he insists that the lack of marks from gateways that gateways would leave on floors or on carpets or anything like that. The fact that the victims are being killed with knives and not the power seems suspicious to him. Various other notes like this. He's like, I don't think that this is Black Aja doing this. I don't think this is channelers doing this. I think this is some other kind of assassin. And there's the official head of the tower guard, Chubane, is a little bit reluctant to really talk with Gawain about anything because I think he assumes that Gawain is trying to make a place to take the head of the guard from him, because obviously he kind of failed as the head of the tower guard with regard to a couple of different instances of tower defense recently. But Gawain does insist to Chubane that he only wishes to be Egwene's warder, and that's the only thing that he cares about. He's not out for his position, and so Chubane does discuss some of these possibilities with Gawain, and yeah, he basically allows Gawain to help a little bit more, and to spread a little bit more information, such as, the purpose behind the attacks, Gawain's theories behind the attacks, spreading a little bit more of this information amongst the official Aes Sedai investigators to see if some other angles of approach might be taken. Following this little bit of inspection, Gawain does go to meet with Egwene and actually he basically tells her to command every sister who is without a warder currently to bond one for safety purposes and also to prevent more murders because of his theories that it is a regular assassin. Of course, they know that the sisters who have been murdered at this point, little detail of all of them is that none of them have had warders, and it might be useful that if all of the sisters have warders, it might be less likely that they'll be targeted for this kind of thing, or there will have to be more care taken when they're being targeted, or whatever it is that you want to make the technicality there. In either case, Gawain basically tells Egwene to do this, and Egwene does at least relent enough to agree that it's not a bad idea to do so she considers the possibility, but she also relents when Gawain he just wants to know what's going on because Egwene is keeping secrets from him. He can tell, but Egwene finally relents to tell him that Messiana is indeed in the tower and that she is the one committing the murders, that it isn't Black Aja. He's right that the official story isn't the exact truth, but that it is a Forsaken that is in the tower that is doing it. And yeah, Gawain reacts pretty surprisingly well to this. But when he does leave, Egwene ponders, like I said, a little bit about his suggestion about bonding people, and she also ponders a little bit about what she was doing before Gawain came to her as well, just writing a letter to Darlin, King Darlin down in Tyr, about Rand breaking the seals, about his intents to do this. She intends to basically sow, not rivalries per se amongst Rand's allyship, but basically to subvert Rand's authority with some of these things with regard to this admittedly crazy idea about breaking the seals to the Dark One's prison amongst Rand's allies, so that she can have a little bit more, maneuverability with regard to negotiating with him. And that makes for all of the directly White Tower related scenes. But there is one other scene that occurred in the prologue that I hadn't talked about yet that was related to Rand's plotline from the last book, and which disturbs me personally quite greatly. And that is the fact that Grendel actually survived the attack at Natron's barrow, which is certified not fantastic. So the way that this occurred is that it wasn't Grendel who actually did the compulsion back on, well, man, what was his name? I already closed my prologue notes here, so I forgot the man's name. Is it Ramshalon or something like that? Something along those lines. But in either case, whatever his name is, yeah, Ramshalon. It wasn't Grendel who did the compulsion upon him. It was Arengar and Delana, who happened to also to be in Natron's barrow, and Grendel had them do the compulsion for whatever reason, determining not to do it herself with this one specific person for some reason. But so it does happen. And she watches through, she does this other like weird magic trick that she has of watching through the eyes of a particular bird that she has on hand that she sends to follow Ramshalon as he goes back to, do the whole scene that happened in the Gathering Storm. But she witnesses through the eyes of this bird basically what Rand is doing, and sees him using the access key and pulling a large amount of power in order to destroy Natron's barrow. She's able in very final seconds to determine, oh, he's about to just destroy this place. And she emerges from the viewpoint of this bird. She very rushedly composes a gateway and escapes the barrow right before it's destroyed, after shielding Delana and Arengar, so that the compulsion will still disappear when Natron's barrow is destroyed, obviously, because those two will be dead, but Grendel will have survived. So that, yikes. Major yikes moment, for sure. Just absolutely insane reveal. I was not particularly thrilled with that. I mean, I was a little bit confused when Grendel was a POV in the prologue. I was just like, okay, it's cool, I guess, to see this scene from her POV now, like after the fact. That's cool, but why are we doing... Oh, that's why we're doing this. It's because she's alive. And, yeah, I don't even know what else to say to that. I am not happy about that fact. It definitely makes things a little bit more complicated. But because she was able to escape, she did survive, and Rand doesn't know she's alive, she actually manages to get away. She goes out to some other hideout, and in a scene from her POV in Chapter 5, she does get visited by Moradin, because, of course, the destruction of Natron's barrow and her escaping and Arengar dying is not something that would escape at the Dark One's gaze. He would know that that happened anyway. And in this visit from Moradin, she is obviously chided quite severely for letting Arengar die, but she is able to twist the story a little bit to suggest that the destruction of the barrow was basically on purpose, that she led Rand to her basically on purpose, in order to... I mean... She insists that Arengar's death part wasn't on purpose, but she insists that the intent to make Rand believe that she is dead, that he was able to kill her, that specific purpose of manipulation was on purpose. And so she says that she will make up for Arengar's death by putting forth even more plans, by pursuing some other plans that have already been set forth for going after Perrin next, to kind of like shift a little bit of focus on portions of the story. And in her telling Moradin that she plans to go after Perrin next, Moradin does reveal some dark prophecies that he happens to have access to that nobody else has ever seen before, basically, that suggests that Perrin's death will be by the hand of a Forsaken, which is really interesting, actually. I'm taking note of that, heavy mental note of that, but he does assure Grendel that it will be very, very bad for her if she fails in actually getting rid of Perrin the way that she promises to do so. So yeah, that is Grendel's section, and because that scene actually mentions Perrin, the fact that she is going to soon be going after Perrin, that's going to take us into the next storyline, which is basically the little bit of convergence between Perrin and also Galad, who is now the Lord Captain Commander, or whatever the technical term is, of the Whitecloaks. And the reason why I talk about these two side by side is because both of them have seen in the prologue. Each one of them has a scene in the prologue anyway. And then every chapter where one of them appears so far, at least within the first 10 chapters, is met. There's Perrin POV, and then there's Galad POV, basically. There's one chapter where they switch back and forth a handful of times, but these storylines are happening concurrently, and they are relevant to each other, so we'll talk about them together. And before we get into it, I do want to basically say that I'm actually really glad about the way that Perrin's storyline and also Galad's here starts in this book, because you have Galad and the Whitecloaks doing something, having some relevance in the story again. I mean, for all intents and purposes, basically for the first time since Morgase was being captured by them, and which is also funny because Morgase is now with Perrin's company, which is also another dynamic that I didn't really think about with regard to the way that this section ends, but we might come around on that point a little bit later if I remember to bring it back up again. But in either case, you have the Whitecloaks being an interesting political group to focus on again now, and also Perrin has some useful and genuinely interesting plot momentum for the first time, once again, in a very long time, because he had like a subplot, and then that subplot had a subplot, or rather Perrin's plotline was basically just go fetch Massima for Rand and bring him back, and that was the goal, and then that got distracted by 3 books for him to save Serene, and then Massima died anyway. So basically the entire point of Perrin's plotline for like 4 books at this point was nothing. He had no purpose in the series writ large for that entire time. And he also had relatively little character development as well. This was something else that was really bothering me, was that through those books, there's like little inklings of character development, or you get to see certain things there, but a lot of it's like so drawn out that it's ineffective, or just straight up doesn't actually do anything, or he continues to revert back to the same place. Here in the beginning of this book, you're actually starting to see him confront some of these things, particularly within his specific scene of the prologue, which features him dreaming a little bit and working tirelessly within a dream. And in this dream, notably, I believe it is within Tel'aran'rhiod and not the wolf dream specifically, at least in the prologue, I think, where he is working tirelessly to forge something, where he's trying to work in a forge on something to shape something, but he doesn't really know what it is, and he's also not really able to make it very well. He's trying to figure out what that thing that he's supposed to be making is, and he's also battling with his own internal identity. And he does that battle with Hopper there. And I believe his scene in chapter 2 is basically the same thing, or maybe not chapter 2. It might be a little bit later, might not, I don't even remember. I think that might have just been all that I said about his scene in the prologue, because that's all that I really found important. But he does interact with Hopper, who happens to be in Tel'aran'rhiod with him, interestingly enough, basically having an argument about him not wanting to lose himself to the wolf identity like some other wolf brothers have in the past. But also needing to acknowledge that he needs to be able to control that he needs to be able to also be the wolf sometimes. And although Hopper doesn't really understand this idea of controlling the wolf per se, because he sees Perrin as young bull, he is the wolf young bull, Perrin is having this conflict within himself between being a normal person and being the wolf brother. And so that's something that occurs in that scene, and I believe also occurs in another dream a little bit later, like I said, in one of the other chapters. In chapter 4, actually, he straight up has another dream, but he's in the wolf dream, and he argues with Hopper a little bit more about becoming lost in the wolf hunt, which he still fears a little bit, before ending up joining the pack, nearly killing a stag, and coming to an implicit agreement with Hopper finally to learn the wolf dream to actually, make some moves in that way, because of course I believe it was in the Gathering Storm where he tried to go to the Wolf Dream and force Hopper essentially to teach him how to control this, and Hopper was like, you're not going to talk to me that way, and then forced him out of the Wolf Dream. So now there's a little bit of reconciliation there, and Perrin's psyche there with regard to his own identity and everything seems to be ready to move forward a little bit, which is really cool. But anyway, yeah, so outside of the dream as well, Perrin is, leading his people, leading the two river folk, as well as all the people that they freed from the Shido Aiel. They are traveling along the Jahana Road, which of course we recognize the name of the Jahana Road as being the place where Nynaeve was able to learn from Rand that they are at, so that they could eventually get Tam to meet with Rand. That hasn't happened in this book yet. That scene hasn't happened yet, but we're jumping back in time a little bit, catching Perrin's storyline up to this moment. Perrin is leading his people along the Jahana Road, coming to basically an area where one of the others sent ahead, there was a group of other people that were sent ahead of them, traveling to go a little bit earlier, and one of those people has been waiting a few days for Perrin's group to catch up to report that the rest of them, despite having been ordered to just continue north before reaching a certain spot where they could go to Caemlyn, that a bunch of these people decided to turn east on the main road to Lugard so that they could avoid some worse mud, because there's been some muddy weather and just bad delays regarding some of that movement. So Perrin's party basically stops here. They plan to take a little bit of a rest while Perrin debates between sending everybody else back home right then versus waiting until they're all safe in Caemlyn, and also debating between the route that they're going to take, whether they're going to continue going north or if they're also going to follow and go east toward Lugard in order to do this. Just some general deliberation that Perrin's got to do. At the very end of Perrin's POV in Chapter 2, some of his Aiel scouts actually come with news of something for Perrin to see, something that is very important for him to notice. And the next scene sees Perrin and everybody else observing that there is actually a piece of the Blight, interestingly enough, that has basically been transported to an area nearby them. And while the rest of everybody else camps out and rests a bit, Perrin does order for the Wise Ones and the Aes Sedai to burn and just completely destroy everything of the Blight that is here to try to prevent it from spreading a little bit further. And that's also the scene where after making this order, he has that wolf dream moment that I mentioned. But yeah, so that happens, and then the next time that we see Perrin is actually from outside his POV. It is from Morgase's POV, where she is serving tea at a meeting that is occurring between Perrin and Queen Alliandre and Barrelane, as well as some of the Aes Sedai and Wise Ones, and where in this scene, Perrin orders for all of the Wolfhead banners to be burned because, again, he's still having this internal conflict of who he is, and he doesn't really see himself as this proper leader. He's really only seeing himself as this like placeholder, taking people to be able to, send them home once he has his Ashaman who are strong enough to make gateways to send them home properly, or everybody else to swear to Rand personally rather than to him. And there's a bit of conflict with regard to that identity in this scene where people are just like, you do realize we swore to you, right? Not necessarily to Rand, but Perrin's kind of a little bit bullheaded. I think he's still a little bit immature and needs to realize that he is the person that these people are following this whole time, and he needs to really get to grips with that. So I anticipate that that's going to be the big character arc for him in this book. I'm looking forward to seeing where that goes. But yeah, so that is where that goes. But anyway, there is a plan placed to prepare a little bit for traveling and what the group is going to end up doing, because Perrin does want to send people home, and so the plan is basically send some scouts ahead to Carrion to see if Rand is still there, because he might not still be there, and while we're at it, send some Carrion refugees home who want to be sent home there, and then we'll go about from that point on sending everybody else home once we figure out where Rand is, so that we can go talk to him and get some more Ashaman to help with sending everybody home or wherever it is that they need to go. And that's basically what Perrin gets people to agree on or sets forth as the plan, essentially. But after the meeting, interestingly enough, because again, this scene occurs from Morghase's POV, Perrin tries to order Morghase and Talonvor to marry in this scene, and Morghase refuses to comply out of principle. In a very queenly manner, uses a little bit of that background as the queen to resist Perrin's basically order, and tells him, like, there are some things that as a leader you do not tell people to do. This is one of those things. Keep out of the affairs of love of people. Like, just don't do that. That's inappropriate. And when she goes to try to talk to Talonvor about what just happened there, she ends up going back to the tent because she notices that some of Perrin's scouts are returning again with another report for something for him, and she overhears that there are Whitecloaks on the road ahead. Which is a very concerning thing, but that's going to allow us to actually talk a little bit about Galad's side of the story, because again, all of these scenes that have been occurring from Perrin's POV, we've had Galad POVs to kind of offset them. We see in the prologue and chapter 2 a little bit of Galad leading the Whitecloaks also out through a swamp that his scouts had advised going through, so that they could set up a trap for another Whitecloak, Asanawa, who personally believes Galad to be a dark friend and is trying to come after him, and he gets basically caught by them. All of his group is too tired from romping through this swamp to actually combat Asanawa and his people, but Galad, as the Lord Captain Commander, basically says, well, I'm not going to let you fight my people, and I'm also not going to let you question them, so as long as you don't question them, I will give myself up, and you can question me as much as you want. Asanawa does take Galad in, and he is beaten. He does incur some maltreatment by the hands of Asanawa, but in the next scene that we have from him, he is actually set free by various of the other Lord Captains of the Whitecloaks, who all basically banded together, both the people who were following Galad and the people who were following Asanawa, being like, well, we don't necessarily believe you to be a dark friend, and Asanawa leading these large groups of Whitecloaks against each other in battle because he believes you personally to be a dark friend is not something we agree with. We also saw how noble you are in trying to protect all of the Whitecloaks, and basically we accept you as the Lord Captain Commander, actually. So they betrayed and killed Asanawa, and so now all of the Whitecloaks are following Galad, which is cool. So that happens. The next scene is Galad and his children on their way heading towards Andor. They are also trying to make it to Andor, and along the way, Galad has also sent word to some of the other Whitecloaks who were back in Shan-Chan territory and wherever else, letting them know what happened with Asanawa. And I think he asks for all of them to, come to him so that they're all together in one group now instead of being split apart, because there was a little bit of a rift there. He has also announced a little bit of his personal intentions to ally the Whitecloaks with the White Tower, interestingly enough, because this sure seems like a lot of blasphemy coming from somebody like him, but he is determined that it is out of necessity, that the ultimate evil, the ultimate opposition to the world is the Dark One, and in order to defeat the Dark One, it is probably necessary for all of the forces that aren't the Dark One's actual friends to be allied against him. So that starts with the White Tower. He says that this is an important political move. So that's another thing from that scene. He also receives a little bit of word from Child Buyer that some folk have been captured on the Johanna Road. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. This group that has been captured by the Whitecloaks here includes Basil Gill and some of the other associates from Perrin's group that were sent on ahead of them. So, yeah, that's not fantastic. As a result of this capturing of the groups, the group of Basil Gale's group, they learn from some of them through questioning and stuff that Perrin's army is nearby, and that Perrin is the one leading that group. And of course, the White Cloak named Bornhold, whose father was killed by Perrin way back in the day, reports Perrin as the man who killed his father, which is not fantastic, and also sets the tone for that next chapter that sees these two groups, learning of each other. Now, Galad and Perrin are both heading towards Caemlyn basically at this point, and they have some intersection where part of Perrin's people have been captured by the White Cloaks, and so he knows that they're there, and because Perrin did learn of that when he was told that the White Cloaks were nearby, and Galad learns that Perrin is nearby and that he's this person who has killed White Cloaks in the past. So there's some keen tension in between these two groups implicitly as a result. And in Chapter 7, chapters 7 and 10 are the other chapters that involve these two POVs. Basically are them slowly coming together at this point. Not actually battling yet, but getting to a point where they're basically going to, Perrin learns from Gaul in Chapter 7 that Basil Gale and his group are being held by the White Cloaks, so Perrin can't exactly just straight up avoid them the way that he might have been hoping to. He also learns that this particular group of the White Cloaks that are nearby contains the Lord Captain Commander within, that he is amongst them. He also gets reports that his own forces are larger, and given that they have the benefit of channelers between Aes Sedai and Wise Ones and the Ashaman, he hopes to be able to defuse the situation before resorting to violence, but he knows that if it does resort to violence, that he does have a keen leg up over the White Cloaks. Meanwhile, in the White Cloak camp, Galad learns that Perrin's camp also has not just Perrin's wolf head banner, which in the previous meeting with, from Morghase's POV, he had the banner ordered to be taken down and burned so that he could separate himself from it. But Galad learns that despite the wolf head banner coming down, there are also banners of Ghealdan and Mayene here amongst the camp because of Alliandre and because of Barrelane. Bayer gives a little bit of a personal report on who Perrin is, including him being at Falma way back in Book 2 of the series, killing White Cloaks there, the fact that he did kill Bornhold's father, as we mentioned previously, and also that he raised an army from the Two Rivers, where he believes that Trollocs were used as an attack force against the Two Rivers to get the Two Rivers folk to be part of Perrin's army, because Perrin's a dark friend, and so he was playing two sides of this battle for some reason, which doesn't actually make any sense, but White Cloaks, and there are several of them that are already convicted or hold the conviction that Perrin just straight up is a dark friend who needs to be brought to justice, and unfortunately ultimately convince Galad that this is the case, that he does need to be brought to justice. And Chapter 10 sees Perrin deliberating about how to deal with the White Cloaks on the one hand, and with the White Cloaks actually approaching Perrin's camp. So one thing that does occur in Chapter 10 before the actual meeting is that the Ashaman Naald figures out how to form a circle with the Wise Ones, because this was something that was also brought up in that meeting from Morghase's POV, was that in order to actually make gateways to send people home properly, it might be useful for the Ashaman and the Wise Ones specifically are the ones who make this offer to form a circle, so that the Ashaman can make bigger gateways to allow more people through faster, and therefore be able to get through that without them, risking weakening themselves too much more than they already are, because they're still recovering from snake bites that they got from a bubble of evil at some point, all of that kind of technical stuff. So there's that. You also have the other Ashaman, Grady, who needs to learn how to do this now that Naald's figured it out, requesting an afternoon to go visit his family, because he informs Perrin at this point that the taint upon Sidon is gone, and because the taint is gone, now he has a reason to live rather than just a reason to die. There was some very compelling philosophical discourse going on within the chapter surrounding that point. All very cool stuff, but Child Bornhald is actually escorted into the camp by Tam within the chapter, announcing that Galad is actually outside of the camp waiting for a short visit for Perrin. Perrin goes to try for a short parley with them, asking for a more proper parley so that they can come to some agreement so that Perrin can get his people and just leave. That's what Perrin wants to do. But Galad witnesses Perrin's golden eyes and is further convinced that he might just be the dark friend that the others have said that he is, and that he is already basically set to battle, that he is already set upon meeting Perrin in battle, and promises that he will free Gil and Perrin's other people if Perrin meets him in battle, and that's going to happen. So yeah, that's where that leaves off. And so whenever we pick up again with Perrin and Galad's POV, it's going to be probably some form of skirmish. I'm sure I probably would have witnessed a little bit of that. Maybe I would have been able to witness that within the next 5 chapters if I'd been able to get to that this week, but unfortunately, I did not manage to get to that this week. I just didn't have time to read it. But lest you think that we are quite done here, unfortunately this video has ended up being quite long anyway. I'm so sorry. We do have 2 Matt POV chapters that occurred, chapters 8 and 9, where we get some interesting stuff going on here. Once again, kind of similar to Perrin's POV, you have some pretty immediate escalation of tension, relatively speaking here. So, Chapter 8, of course, Matt was transported to Caemlyn, kind of off-page, actually. Viren didn't actually transport them to Caemlyn in the Gathering Storm, but Matt did make that agreement with Viren in the last book, and because Viren did end up going to the White Tower where she died at the end of that book, it implied that Matt got transported to Caemlyn. Indeed he did, and in Caemlyn in chapters 8 and 9, Matt is kind of unsure what he's going to do about Viren's letter, whether or not to actually open it. He goes to a particular inn where he, talks with the barmaid or whatever you want to call her about this, deliberating about whether or not he should do it, because he's made this promise that if he opens it, he will do it, but he doesn't want to do that. But if he doesn't open it, he has to wait in Caemlyn even longer to actually go and do what he's doing. He's just kind of stressed about this letter. He does ultimately leave that inn, and he goes to another inn so that he can try to relax and play some dice. But while he's playing dice there, he is a little bit spooked by some news that there was somebody who was murdered by having his throat ripped out, and he was drained of all blood, which tells Matt that the Golem has managed to follow him all the way to Caemlyn. He is in Caemlyn. Like I said, this spooks Matt, and he leaves. He goes to a third inn where he finds Tom doing a performance, gathers Tom up a little bit, telling him about the news of the Golem being around, and they all return to the band's camp outside of Caemlyn. Matt tried to get Elaine's notice at one point, writing to her, and she hasn't responded to him to any degree. He has had no direct word from Elaine about what's going on, but Matt has heard some news of Trollocs invading the Borderlands. There's some other things that he has been hearing from his people about what's going on outside in the world, and he also seeks some confirmation about the Tower of Genji in here. Teslin also stops by to remind him of the White Tower's reunification, rumor of the White Tower's reunification that he has heard about, and also announced that the Aes Sedai that are part of the Red Band, that have been following the Red Band, are planning to leave to go to the White Tower, to return to the White Tower now that it is united. And Matt, out of mutual respect for Teslin, because apparently Matt and Teslin respect each other, offers them horses and provisions. But that is right before they get attacked, because Matt is attacked directly by the Golem at his tent in his camp. Crazily enough, Teslin manages to basically attack it indirectly to scare it off, using the power to throw things at it, because you can't actually use the power against a Golem directly. And Matt also returns back into his tent and finds that his guards that were not standing outside the tent, which he should have noticed but didn't, they're dead. They are dead inside his tent. Olver the kid was also supposed to be in the tent. He searches for Olver, but he is not in the tent. This scares Matt, but he does learn that Olver was with Noel, and when going to Noel's tent, finds that Olver is safe with him. But because of this attack, and because of what some of the things that the Golem said to Matt about being ordered to basically not, he still needs to not make as big of a deal as he could. Basically, like, try not to be noticed beyond what is necessary, or make much more disturbance than what is necessary for some arbitrary reason. But he has been basically ordered to murder everybody who is close to Matt if he's not able to kill Matt. So, and this included the mentioning of names like Noel and Tom, and some other people as well. So it is determined that Matt and Noel and Tom are now going to stay inside the city of Camelin and switching inns every night, either until Matt or the Golem is dead, until that is accomplished, because the Golem just straight up needs to die, and he's going to continue to come after Matt until Matt's dead too, and Matt wants him to come for Matt directly so that nobody else gets caught in the crossfire back in the Band of the Red Hand. In the meantime, while all of that's going on, Matt also determines that preparations to go to the Tower of Genji are to be ramped up so that can happen very soon as Matt's promise to Viren is fulfilled, whether he opens the letter or not. I really hope he opens the letter because I'm curious to see what is actually in it. Matt also needs to petition Elaine again personally, so he's going to go try to talk to Elaine, and since he'll be in Camelin, maybe it'll be a little bit easier to do that. We'll see. But he's going to try to talk to Elaine about being able to use some of her forges and materials and stuff to get Eludra's dragons started to be made like he promised her in the last book. And he also agrees to let Jolene, one of the other Aes Sedai, have horses and provisions to lead for the tower, because Jolene also informs Matt that she is going to be leaving for that reason. And that is everything that occurred in this week's reading. I know I rushed through quite a bit of that, but that's the way things go. I'm very scared for the way that the next few of these diaries are going to go and how long the videos are going to be, because I didn't actually cover that much, and this video still managed to be almost an hour long. But once again, I apologize. Right now, I think that the next diary is probably going to be chapters 11 through 24, because that'll be an even split of what I have remaining in the book for the next 3 weeks. We'll see if I'm able to get through all of that. Actually, my goal is to get through all of that here over the next few days so that I can get that next diary recorded a little bit early. This video is managing to come out on time, but at the time of recording, the day beforehand, I actually had the power go out this morning, and it was out for several hours, and I wasn't sure when it was going to be back on, so there was the possibility that today's video could have been delayed as a result of it. Fortunately, that's not the case, but, I like to have videos done ahead of time, and the next diary I would like to get done here in a few days. Just generally get a good bit more of the book read over the next few days while I'm home alone again, as opposed to the last few days where I've been a little bit busier with other stuff going on. But that is everything for this video. That is everything for this diary. I'm looking forward to continuing. I'm looking forward to seeing what it is that happens with Perrin and Galad. That's probably the storyline that I'm most excited to see more of from this book in particular, although my favorite moments from the reading this week were probably the interactions between like Egwene and Rand, between Rand and some of the other characters. It was all really fun stuff, but I'm into this so far. It's not quite as actively hype as The Gathering Storm was the entire way through, up to this point anyway, but it's not really much of a step down. It's not really worth noting as a step down in my opinion. I'm enjoying the beginning of this book more than I enjoyed the beginning of Knife of Dreams, for example, so we're still in that this feels like the Wheel of Time that I once loved territory, and I'm hoping that continues. But that is going to be the end of this diary. I will be back next week to cover, like I said, I think it'll be chapters 11 through 24 now. We shall see what that actually ends up being in the next video, but I do plan to read through the next 225 pages over the next 3 mornings, which will be 75 pages a day, which is pretty doable with Sanderson's prose reading much quicker than Jordan's. But you will know what I actually cover in the next diary next week when that video comes out. Thank you guys for watching if you did. For now, I've been your host, King Crusoe. You can call me KC, and I hope to see you guys in the next video.